Hello beautiful people, welcome back or welcome to my channel. In today's video we're going to be going through my July wrap up. Yes, this video is very late. We are nearly done with August at this point and I do apologize for that, but better late than never, right? I've never actually posted a wrap-up video because I end up not getting to them until it's really late in the next month, and so it just feels wrong to post them. But I decided that no matter when this video was going to get posted, I was going to post it no matter what, because I want to be able to share more about the books that I've been reading over the month, especially ones that don't make it into reading vlog videos, like ones that I'm just reading on my own time. I feel like I tend to not have a lot of other reasons to sit down and talk to you guys about the books that I'm reading in more in-depth reviews, so I'm sorry that this video is late, but I hope you guys enjoy it nonetheless. Since we're already late, let's just hop right into this video. In July, I ended up reading 8 novels. 3 of the books were on Kindle Unlimited, and 4 of them were from my 24 in 24. 3 of the books were mystery, 2 were thriller, 1 was romance, 1 classic, and 1 memoir. Though the distinction between some of the mysteries and thrillers are a little blurry, I'm still gonna count it as 3 mysteries and 2 thrillers. One of the mysteries is a psychological suspense, but I also feel like it could be called a mystery. We're gonna go through this by genre, not when I read it, just to make this a little bit easier, and maybe you're more interested in one genre that I read over another, so we're gonna do this by genre. To go through the 3 mysteries that I read, first off, which this was the first book that I read in July, and that was The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson. In this book, you follow Annabelle Price. She goes by Belle, so that is what I'm gonna be calling her. And her mother, Rachel Price, went missing 16 years ago while she was a child, and there was no trace found, no remains found, and it was a giant unsolved mystery for most of Belle's life. And after 16 years of Rachel being gone, a documentary was being filmed, and Belle and her dad and her family and friends were all coming together to do interviews and talk about Rachel's disappearance. When out of the blue, during this documentary being filmed, Rachel stumbles out of the woods, pretty much literally, and while most people are relieved, Belle doesn't quite believe that her mother disappeared. At the time of Rachel's disappearance, she was with Belle, and so Belle believed that her mom abandoned her, and there's a ton of other theories that this book goes into. I actually did guess some of the theories and twists and things like that in this book, but not to a point where it made this book unenjoyable or totally guess-worthy. Like, I didn't necessarily guess the ending of this book, which I love. I love to not be able to guess what's happening, and I ended up rating The Reappearance of Rachel Price 4 stars. I feel like there are some things that would have made it a little bit better. Some of the plot I feel like could have been done a little bit differently, or I feel like some parts were dragging on a little bit, but for the most part I read this book in a couple of days. It was a super easy, fast-paced read and I really enjoyed it. If you're somebody that's not really into the mystery genre, I feel like this is a good book to get you into it. Again, it is a young adult book, so it's pretty lighthearted for the most part, and it's definitely more lighthearted than a lot of other mystery or thriller books that I've read. I think this could be a very good book to get you into the genre. Next, for the mystery books, I read The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. This book was really surprising to me because it was a book that was very hyped online on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you find your book recommendations. I feel like people were recommending this book, and it actually was very good. I do feel like a lot of the time on social media, books can get overhyped and it makes the reading experience not as great, but I ended up rating The Housemaid 4 stars. There was some pieces of the mystery or the unveiling of who was behind the mystery aspects of the books that weren't my favorite. I feel like they could have been written differently or just could have been resolved a little bit differently, but for the most part I feel like the ending of this book sets up really well for the sequel. But I've heard pretty bad things about the sequel, if I'm gonna be honest. A lot of people said it fell flat after the first one, but I still do want to read it at some point, just to feel more satisfied with reading the entire series. I think it's a 3-book series now, But I do, again, think that this was a super easy read. It was very fast-paced, in my opinion. And again, if you're not too into the mystery genre but want to like dip your toes in, I feel like this is a good novel to get you into it. This was one that I read on Kindle Unlimited. I do have the physical copy, but I ended up reading it on my Kindle, so if you do have Kindle Unlimited, this is a book I would recommend. And the last mystery that I read in July was The Girl Beneath the Sea by Andrew Mayne, and I rated that book 5 stars. I really enjoyed the pacing and the plot in this book. The Girl Beneath the Sea is about a police diver in Florida who goes on dives to find evidence, to help out on cases just here and there for the local police department. One day while diving, she ends up finding a body, which then leads to Sloane getting stalked by assassins and smugglers and people who think that she knows too much. She has to work alongside other police officers and people that she can trust to stay away from them, keep her and her daughter safe. There is just a lot about this book that I really enjoyed. It's not really anything crazy. It's a relatively simple book, but this book gave me a lot of similar vibes to the Speed movies or the Rush Hour movies, and I absolutely love both of those. And it was just a really easy read. Again, very fast paced. A lot of these mysteries that I read in July were paced very well, and I didn't find a lot of trouble while reading them, and I would definitely enjoy The Girl Beneath the Sea. It is, I believe, a 5-book series. I would love to continue on the series and finish it all if I can find the time to soon, but I would recommend that. Again, it is on Kindle Unlimited. And then for the one romance that I read in July, that was The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren. I talked about this book in my trying to finish my 24 in 24 reading vlog that I just posted. If you want to get more in depth to some of these books and see more of my thoughts while I was actually reading them, go check out that vlog. But this book I rated a 4-star. It was just a cutesy little STEM romance. It wasn't necessarily anything, again, new or crazy, but I did really enjoy the premise of this book. It is between two people who get matched up through DNA through a dating app service that does connect you through your specific DNA and chromosomes and find somebody with similar genetics to you. So that's like a really cool premise. So if you are a Ali Hazelwood fan, I feel like this book could be up your alley. It's definitely not as spicy as Ali Hazelwood books by any means, but I did find this book very enjoyable, and I think that this is an underrated Christina Lauren book. This is my first book I've ever read by Christina Lauren. I thrifted this off of Pango Books a couple years ago, and I'm just now getting to it, and I feel like I should have read it earlier, but maybe it wouldn't have hit the same if I read it earlier, if you know what I mean. But I actually have never heard of this book before. I'm not really sure what drew me to this book originally, but I feel like a lot of people hype up other Christina Lauren books, but not this one, so I would definitely check this one out if you are interested in STEM, cutesy, sciencey romances. And then to go into the one classic that I read, that was Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. This book I also rated 4 stars. This book was kind of contradictory for me. This book was published in 1926, and there's a lot of things in this book like harmful and offensive language that is just not acceptable and just disgusting to read, honestly. The 4-star is for the plot itself and the overall readability as a classic novel, because this book is relatively mundane. There's not a whole lot that happens in this book that's necessarily notable, but that's something that I really enjoyed about it, because I feel like a lot of classic novels, which are highly reviewed and raved about, they end up having really monumental statements in them and having things that you can really take away from, and I think there are pieces of that in this book. It is about a guy who is struggling with his own masculinity. It's honestly just a little slice of life book from these people who are just living life in France, in Spain. They kind of just hang out, travel, live life, and I think that's kind of beautiful that it's relatively simple. I think that it doesn't need to be anything crazy, but again, my 4 stars is for that review. It's not for the things that I don't agree about this book, but again, if you want to hear more about what I think about this book and all that stuff, go watch the other video. I feel like I kind of got more in depth about it. It has been a couple of weeks since I've read these books, so there might be things about these books that I missed, missed, so go check out the other video. And then to get into the one memoir that I read, that was Speak Okinawa by Elizabeth Mickey Brina. This book was beautiful, and again, I read this one in the other reading vlog. I'm sorry I just keep repeating that, but again, I want you guys to know that some of these reviews aren't necessarily full reviews because we'd be here all day, and I've already talked about a couple of them, so I don't want to repeat myself too much. For the people that do watch most of my videos, it would just get a little boring. But I do not have a rating for this book. By the way, this is a novel of somebody's life. It is not a fictional story. It is not something I feel like I have the ability or the power to rate. That would just feel very wrong. But I will say that the pacing in this book and the overall writing in this book was very well done, in my opinion. I think that it was a very beautiful way of writing a memoir. You flip between Elizabeth, the author, and her mother's lives, and you go through a lot of the challenges that they both face, which are entirely different. There's something about Elizabeth's parts in this book that are so raw and unfiltered that I found really beautiful, and honestly, they did pull at my heartstrings, but so did Elizabeth's mother's point of views. They're more about Elizabeth's mother as a young girl living in Okinawa and how she came to meet Elizabeth's father as he was a soldier stationed overseas. He ended up meeting Elizabeth's mother while she was working at a diner or cafe. There was a lot of things that were shared about what the women in Okinawa had to go through with a lot of soldiers and things they had to comply with, and it was very heartbreaking, and it can be really hard to read for some people, for sure. I mean, it was hard for me to read, but it was also well written, and I think that I learned a lot from this book. Oh, Elizabeth's mother was a hostess at a nightclub. That is the first line in the synopsis. I don't know how I missed that. She didn't work at a cafe, she worked at a nightclub. Right, I do remember that now. I apologize, it has been, again, a couple of weeks since I read this book. But this book was very beautiful. If you are into that type of thing, if you want to learn more about people's lives and just get into memoirs, I would recommend this one. But again, it can be definitely hard to read some memoirs. It can be really hard on the heart sometimes, so read with caution. And then to get into the last two books we read, which are thriller books. First, I read Quicker by Lawrence Danners, and this is a 18-book series. I'm just gonna say that. I feel like that's kind of crazy. This was the other book that I read on Kindle Unlimited this month, and I ended up rating it a 2.5 star, which is my lowest rating for July, and also I think my lowest rating of the year. There are a couple things I want to preface before I go into this review. This first book was published in 2012, and the most latest book in the series was published in 2023, so I feel like there will be a lot of differences between the beginning of the series and the end. I have not read any other books in this series, but I also wouldn't mind seeing where they go necessarily. But there are a couple things about this book that made it a 2.5 star. This book is a sci-fi thriller, which is something I don't think I've ever read before, or there's no other books I can really think of that I've read that are sci-fi thriller, which I thought was a very interesting genre to get into. In this book, you're following Elle Donzai, who is a mathematical genius, and she uses her intelligence to help her in athletic and fighting situations, and she also theorizes about quantum mechanics, and that is something that we don't even really get into in this first book, and I think it's something that the quantum mechanics thing I think is something that is explored later in the series. Again, at this point in time, there are 18 books in the series, and I'm not even sure if the series is done yet, so take that what you will. But for the most part, Elle uses this superhuman ability to calculate her speed and her strength against opponents at the speed of light to her advantage to get herself into a military school. She ends up getting, into higher ranks really early on in her military schooling career, and that is something that is kind of frowned upon with other people in the school who don't really understand how she moves so quickly. How does she beat people who are bigger or stronger than her? And I think that is a a really cool premise to a book, to be able to fight your opponents due to your own intelligence rather than strength or speed. And that is something that really drew me to this book. Also, I want to use my Kindle Unlimited more, so this book isn't something I've ever heard about before, and it's probably for good reason, because in my opinion, this book was written relatively poorly. The writing style kind of reminded me of like a Wattpad or like early on writer, and it does kind of give like 2012 vibes. I feel like just with the kind of writing that was coming out at that time. I feel like Sarah Dessen was very popular at that time. This book, I don't believe this book is YA, but it kind of read like YA. I did read this book in a day, so I feel like that is one of the reasons I ended up rating it a 2.5 star, because there was something to this book that made me read it all in one sitting. One part about this book that made me rate it so low is there is a large chunk of this book that relies on harmful stereotypes for a villain in this book that are, just putting it blankly, pretty racist, and so that dropped my rating down very low, and the 2.5 stars, honestly, I feel like is generous. So that's all I'm gonna say about that book. And then the last book that I read in July was Bunny by Mona Awad, and this book I rated 3 stars, and that is honestly very disappointing, because this book I was waiting for literally all year. If you've watched any of my other YouTube videos where I talk about books, this book has probably come up at some point, because I just always heard really good things about this book, and it ended up falling quite flat for me. This book honestly felt like a very, very long fever dream. This book took me quite a few days to finish, and it just wasn't my favorite. It also wasn't the worst book ever. If you wanted to read like a horror psychological thriller, I would probably recommend this book, but it definitely wasn't one of my all-time favorites, and I've been kind of stuck on what to rate it, because there are parts of this book that I find really intriguing and pretty good about the book. Because if you were looking for a book that felt very hazy while you were reading it, or if it kind of feels like you're walking through mud, this book would be it, in the best way possible without that sounding too negative. If you've ever been in the state of mind where you're kind of waking up out of a dream, but you're still kind of in the dream, maybe you can like hear music or like your alarm clock or something, so you're starting to wake up, but you're still dreaming, that is what this book feels like. It feels like a weird dream state, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, that might be what you're looking for, and if that is what you're looking for, this book would probably get a 5 star, because this book is hazy. If I had a word for this book, it would be hazy. It would be psychedelic. This book, there were a lot of parts about this book that honestly just didn't make sense, which is why I rated it a 3 star, because there are pieces of this book where I feel like you're kind of hopping place to place, and you're kind of confused about, why are we here? Why are we talking to these people? Why are these events happening? I feel like this book was missing a lot of explanations, and maybe that's kind of what Mona Awad was trying to do to make it feel like that hazy dream state. But at the same time, if you are a conscious human being, this book also may just fall flat like it did for me, but this book also might be your favorite book ever. I think that there are a lot of great things about this book that make it unique, but I also think there's a lot of things about this book that just weren't my favorite, and unfortunately that is the book that we are ending this video off on. Not the best book in the video, but those are the 8 books that I read in July. For the most part, this was a pretty good reading month. It's not necessarily the worst month I've had, and I read a good amount of books. And again, if you want to see more in depth about a couple of these books, go watch the Reading My 24 in 24 reading vlog video that I posted a couple weeks back. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Make sure to do all the beautiful YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.